Good morning. So, let's you and me talk a little bit about errors and error logging in a production environment. So, if you've watched any of my videos about errors in the past, and maybe I have one or two videos about how to write JavaScript code. So let's just, for the sake of argument, this is applicable to any programming language, I personally believe, but we're gonna stick with JavaScript for now because JavaScript is awesome. And if you will probably know that I am one of those people who is a big advocate of writing robust code that never breaks, or at least try to. Don't know how often I achieve non-breakable code, but that's the way I like to think about it. And what, for me, non-breakable robust code is the sort of code that is written from the inside the function out. And a lot of programmers, especially in JavaScript, have this coding practice where, you know, they don't do input validation, they don't use default values, anything like that. Every single thing they write is basically based on them already knowing what's happening earlier in the program. They make a lot of assumptions, and the way that I write code is always from the perspective of the function. I don't trust, you know how we have this mentality in coding where, you know, in secure coding, we always say, don't trust anything that lives outside of your system. In other words, you do input validation for anything that a user puts into your system. And I take that one further and I say, I don't trust anything that is outside of my function. Ever, period. Don't trust it. Inside of my function, everything happens. That's it. My function is completely responsible for its own health, its own dependencies, and its own usage. That is my rule. Now, if you're supposed to be able to do that, there's also another little rule that you need to follow. And that rule is that you need to be able to return, you need to communicate that there's an error somehow, right? The way that I like to do that is that I like to return a value that indicates that there was an error of some sort. Usually, it's the same behavior you see in index off. Like in the JavaScript, if you do an index off on an array and you can't find the element in question, like you're looking for, you're gonna get a -1. And I think that's a very elegant way to communicate that, hey, something unexpected happened. I don't know what to do now. I'll just return this value. Because the thing is that then you have somehow communicated to the caller of your function that something went wrong and you didn't throw an error. And you didn't return an error or anything like that. And your function is always going to return the same thing. So, because in JavaScript, you know, if you return an error, okay, sometimes you're going to get, as the caller, you're going to get the thing you're expecting, and sometimes you're going to get an error. And that's really, being inconsistent like that, that's not very functional now, is it? But that brings the question, which is the most common argument I get against this. And that is that there are people out there who will tell you that, well, Frederick, if you never break, how will I know that there's a bug? And see, the thing is that is actually a very valid point. If you don't break things, it becomes much trickier. You know, you will maybe get subtle bugs that are basically silent if you're not upfront about something breaking. And a lot of people I talk to treat this as this silver bullet argument against having this approach, and I kind of disagree, because the thing is that, and I've made videos about this in the past. I'm not going to go on a rant on on Amazon and their attitude towards uptimes and availability and all that stuff. But in essence, my argument is this: that unless your system, let's say if you do machine learning, where any small mistake in your code will result in a completely incorrect answer, then yes, you should throw an error immediately. Same thing is, if you have an error when you're starting your server, there's no reason for you to try to make that a robust thing. Your system isn't gonna work. Just throw an error and crash the system. But if it has to do, but for the most part, just having functions that handle these errors, I think, is to be preferred. Now, that brings the question, how do you communicate that there's an issue? And what I would like to argue, which is the way that I do it, I'm not saying that this is the right way to do it, but I think that it's an absolutely valid way of thinking about it. So, if you are, for some reason, in need of communicating that there was an error to whoever is, running your system, what I would like you to do, instead of writing code that throws errors or is less robust than it has to be, is to use logging. So just hear me out on this one. I argue that it's much better to have a system that simply keeps on running. It keeps on trying to just maintain, even if it's if the calculations are wrong, or if the value that you're showing on screen or whatever, even if it's not 100% accurate, it's better that the system is just running and able to be usable for whoever is using it, than that you crash the whole thing. And then you think about it from the perspective that, all right, something went wrong. I need to address this. Sorry. You need to address the issue, right? And the thing is that there is no value for you to crash the system. There is nothing that, that's not, you can communicate that there was an issue to your developers and your team by simply logging the error. So think of it this way. You create a add function, just a simple example. It just adds two numbers together. You do all your input validation, check that it's a number and so forth, and you're making sure that this function is going to behave exactly as you expect it to behave. And if it doesn't, for any reason, if it doesn't because there's a wrong input or whatever, you log that out. Use a log system. There's no reason for you to throw an error. Just let the function return a default value so that the rest of the program can keep on executing as normal, and then you log. Logging is your friend. Log a warning, log an error, depends on how critical the error is. I think that logging is very underused when it comes to something like this. And this is actually the way that I like to solve my problems, because if I do it like that, I get the best of both worlds. I get a system that never goes down. The user can, regardless of if everything is working correctly or not, can always use it. It's always going to have, it's never going to break. And I still get to know I'm not swallowing errors. I'm being responsible. I'm communicating to my development team that, hey, something's not working in this function. There was an unexpected input value or something like that, and you should look at it. So you're getting both. You're not breaking anything, and you get transparency into what the issue was. So that's a tip from me to you. Try to don't write code that is less robust than you can. Try to write good functions, good software. Try to make it as robust as possible, within reason. Don't go completely crazy. And use logging to communicate that there was an error. Don't throw errors if you can avoid it.